Get myself a cola and some gum. Oh, what's this? Why do they specify that it's plastic free? Unless... So, chewing gum is made of plastic. The manufacturers don't actually tell us this, but it's true. Polyvinyl acetate is used in a lot of gums. It's a synthetic elastomer made from crude oil. Yum. It makes gum chewy. And yes, technically that makes gum a single-use plastic. Flavored plastic to be specific. But who cares? Well, even if you aren't swallowing your gum, chewing causes you to ingest a lot of excess plastic. And that plastic is toxic to you. But I'll get to that. First, let's explore all the foods that contain plastic. You'd be surprised how many there are. Famously, fish contains a lot of microplastic. And this is intuitive. There is a lot of plastic pollutions in our oceans. The plastic gets there either through our rivers or a lot of the time through fishing equipment. With enough time, these bigger plastic items degrade through the constant movement and friction they experience, becoming microplastic. The fish end up eating this microplastic, and once they are fished up, that microplastic lands on our plate. A fish can have around 5 pieces of microplastic per 100 grams, a shrimp even up to 20 per 100 grams. If you add that to how much we eat each year, that means we will get hundreds if not thousands of microplastics just from eating fish and other seafood. And these are just the larger pieces of microplastics that can be picked out individually from the fish. If we consider all plastic particles, even the ones we can't see, so-called nanoplastics, the number gets insane. And these are just early studies. As we get better tools to detect different sizes and forms of plastics, these numbers will only grow. So fish and seafood are out of the question. Maybe meat is better. After all, cows and chicken eat grass and grain, not plasticky ocean water. Well, bad news there too. Plastic shows up in a lot of meat as well. Admittedly, a chicken breast seems to contain the least microplastic of any protein, but it is by no means zero. This is also where another factor comes in. As I mentioned in a previous video, plastic cutting boards are a huge source of microplastic. These types of boards are used a lot in meat packing and have been proven to cause microplastics in meats. But the amount of contamination will depend on how the meat is processed. A local butcher will have a much shorter path from farm to table, meaning there will be a lot less ways the meat can be contaminated. Meanwhile, factory farmed meat you would find in a supermarket has come into contact with a lot of plastic, not least the packaging, and will likely end up with more plastic inside the meat. Okay, so maybe animal proteins are out of the question. So vegetable and fruit are the solution, right? Vegetables and fruit have so much microplastics. And this might not be a surprise if you have any experience with farming or even gardening. Farming has a huge plastic problems, something for a future video. Plastic is used in many parts of agriculture, especially in large-scale farms. And of course, this plastic degrades into the earth and ends up in the vegetables that grow in it. But again, the contamination does not stop there. As a vegetable is processed, packaged, and transported, it will get contaminated with more plastic. One study found between 50 and 200,000 particles per gram. This carrot can have around 100,000 particles per gram, which comes to an insane number for a whole carrot. So you may be asking why these numbers seem so much higher than the fish study we considered earlier. This comes down to the fact that the vegetable study automatically identified much smaller particles through a microscope, while the fish study only handpicked plastic it could find. A meta-study came to the conclusion that measuring plastic in our food is still very primitive. The study states, despite the diversity of food consumed in different geographic regions of the world, only limited studies have been conducted on the presence of microplastics in food. The majority of studies analyzed the concentration, material, morphology, and size of microplastics in salt, fish, and shellfish. Owing to the lack of studies on other food items, the overall human microplastics exposure via food consumption is difficult to estimate and compare with other routes of exposure, such as inhalation of micro-sized particles. So even though early evidence shows that there is a lot of microplastic in our food, we may still be oblivious to the true scale of plastic in our food. As a consumer, we are especially hard-pressed to determine which food to choose to reduce our plastic intake. One thing we can look at is how the food is produced. As I showed with meats, the steps and materials used to process the food can determine the amount of microplastic. So taking a deeper look in food processing will give us an indication of how much plastic may be in our food. Ultra-processed foods are foods that go through so many stages of production that they no longer represent the original ingredient. Factories churn out these mass-produced products until they are homogeneous and taste like the product, not the food. Ultra-processed foods have been determined by many experts to not be healthy for a variety of reasons. But it's not just that. The studies on microplastics in food are universally conclusive in finding the most microplastic in processed food. For example, the fish study found up to 30 times as much microplastics in breaded shrimp versus freshly caught shrimp. They also found 31 times as much microplastic in a chicken nugget versus a chicken breast. Even vegan alternatives such as plant-based nuggets have 10 times more microplastic than tofu. The food production process can introduce a lot of microplastic in your food. One of the culprits in this may be salt. A study found a significant amount of microplastic in all commercially available salts. Maybe ironically, Himalayan salt, praised for its health benefits, was found to contain the most plastic. Look, I'm not going to argue against using salt in your cooking, but ultra-processed foods contain an unreasonable amount of salt, which surely adds to the microplastic loads of these food. It seems to become clear that there is no food that doesn't contain microplastic, but we can make choices that reduce the amount we are exposed to. One thing that can help is eating local vegetables and proteins that haven't had to be processed and transported a long distance. Preferring non-packaged foods may also help. But the single biggest thing you can do is avoid ultra-processed foods. That doesn't mean giving up on everything you enjoy, but making little choices when you have the chance. Oh, and one of these choices may be not choosing an item you know contains plastic. Speaking of gum, there have been studies that link gum consumption to microplastic levels in your body. So yes, even if you aren't swallowing your gum, which I really hope you aren't, you're still consuming microplastic. Also, you and I both know that most people are not disposing of their gum correctly. These dots on the floor are all plastic, gum. Each year there is more than 100 tons of plastic garbage on our streets from gum alone. Non-biodegradable plastic garbage. On top of that, we waste a ton of money to clean this from our streets, because if we don't, it won't go away. So what is the alternative? Well, there is this plastic-free gum I found at the Späti. Is it any good? No. Yeah, I hate to say this, but there is a reason we use plastic in gum. It makes gum chewy. The non-plastic alternative, while not terrible, is a lot less satisfying to chew, often becoming stringy and getting stuck in my teeth. So we're stuck in a real dilemma here, because the status quo is clearly not great, and the current alternative is not great for other reasons. But that doesn't have to stay that way. Take vegan or vegetarian meat alternative products. They used to be quite terrible, but as demand for these products grew, more research was put into these products and how to make them better over time. With better alternatives, demand grew even more. Here in Germany, demand for meat alternative products is booming. In fact, this major meat producer sold more meat alternative products than meat products for the first time. The changing consumer demand caused a lasting effect on the type of products available. This is what we call the consumer effect. These little choices that we make together. And maybe they'll lead us to a better future.
just wanna